All right. Even though people may trickle in, we're kind of, in conflict with the annual meeting, but even if people keep trickling in, I think we should get started. Right, we're waiting for our grupo next door. Is that it? Yeah. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do is kind of informally talk to you about our experiences. And I'd like, there were 23 of us who went. Unfortunately, about 10 people or more weren't able to be here today, but I'd like everyone who did go on the trip to stand up, just so people can see who you are. Okay, now you can sit down. So we had a really nice, we always have a nice group. Oh, and there's another one, she's standing up and walking. We had a really well-connected group this year. We had a lot of first-timers as well as returners, and we had some like multiple-year returners and some second-year returners, and that always just gives it a very nice dynamic because even though every trip is special and every trip carries new meaning, it's a different trip if you've been there 6 times than it is if you're going your first time, and it's just a really nice sharing experience that takes place. So we had a great group, all willing, very willing to share, and they're going to jump in here as we go through the slideshow, which Pastor Chris set up for us, and Lisa also was on the trip. And we're hoping that the technology doesn't fail us, but we're pretty sure we're going to be able to do this. So we just wanted to start out by letting you know that we visited a beautiful country and have you see some of the images of beauty in El Salvador. It's a very small country in Central America on the Pacific Ocean. It's between Guatemala and Honduras. For those of you who need to know that, I really didn't have much of a clue where it was before. I just had a very vague clue about where it was. And we visited a number of the natural scenic sites. There are a number of volcanoes in El Salvador that we visited. We started the visit by going to a place called Puerto del Diablo, which is a mountain that has an interesting folk story as well as a sad and kind of troubling story related to the war. The theory is that there were 2 lands, sort of like a Romeo and Juliet situation, and a young man and a young woman fell in love, and the father of the young woman was opposed to this arrangement, so he had the devil blast a hole through the mountain so that they had to go all the way around to get from one side to the other. That's a folklore legend. The actual legend, what really happened during the war is that that's where they took people to push them off the side and kill them. It was a place of torture. This is Lake Ilopango, which is just this beautiful, beautiful crater lake that we went across. Does anyone remember, was it 11 miles across or something like that? Ish. It was really far across for a lake, and it was about 1,000 feet deep, and the motors had like 6 horsepower or 8 horsepower. There's like 12 people in the boat. So it was very tranquil and beautiful on the way over. On the way back, it was a little choppy. Does anyone want to say anything about Ilopango? These are pictures of what we saw on the other side. It's very wild and rustic. It was a site of a...
Well, they were trying to, they wanted to make it into a tourist attraction. A tourist place, so we got to walk around and kind of see where they would have a path and overlooks, which was really very rustic, but nice.
Very rustic, but nice.
The brothers gave us a concert on the island. The brothers lived in a Lincoln-esque shack, and they've been living there for 16 years. And the faith of these guys, unbelievable, unbelievable. And their voice and guitar playing were out of this world, out of this world.
Oh, and there's Kevin right
I brought one shirt for the resort. That was it.
it was a good resort church. So this is at the beach, and every year this is what the church builds into our visit. They want us to see the beauty at the beach, and it really is just spectacular. It speaks for itself. It's kind of grounding and relaxing. Anyone have anything to add about the beach?
Look out for the undertows.
Oh, yeah.
And that's very true. They have riptides that are pretty dangerous.
Amazing sunrise.
Amazing sunrise, yeah. Sunset. Was the little boy there? Did we pass the little boy? Oh, there. So that little boy, I would guess, was about 4 or 5 years old. And he was standing down there by himself. And I thought, my gosh, I would never have let any of my kids when they were 10 walk down to to the water by themselves, especially knowing there's riptide. And he was just as confident as could be, learning to cast his net. And he did a pretty good job. He waited until the right time and he threw it in. He did a really nice job. His father eventually, he went and got his father eventually, but it's just a kind of different approach to things there. We're very much more cautious as a society in all kinds of ways than they are in El Salvador. Some of our ways of being cautious aren't good. Some of them are. Okay, this set of slides is kind of highlighting the point of the trip, and it also has a lot to do with our children that we sponsor. But just the point of the trip, if you were at the 8:30 service, you kind of heard, it's about being, it's about accompaniment, it's about the relationships. So these pictures kind of tell those stories. I'm going to let anyone jump in with what you want. We took our sponsor kids bowling this year, so that's what these pictures are from.
How old are kids you sponsor? All ages?
All ages. Our youngest one right now is Julissa, I think, and she's in 1st grade. And Henry is in 2nd, maybe. And then we have kids, and she's in 9th grade. She's just starting 9th grade. So we have a bunch of kids starting high school, and several in university are wanting to go to university and looking for sponsorships. We do a Christmas with them where we bring cards and letters and gifts from people who sponsor them.
This was really a necessary part of the trip for the relationship with the kids, really. And they really enjoyed that. I got a feeling that was a highlight, us inviting them out. It was good.
That's Wilbur. And that little guy in the middle is Eduardito. Pretty soon he'll be too old to call Eduardito. That's Raquel and Henry. And that's Jacqueline. And Karin and Julissa. And little Julissa. She had a Disney princess shirt on. That's Maricela, who Mark and Rebecca Peterson sponsored. She's going to be starting nursing school this week. Anyone want to say anything about the bishop's meeting? It was kind of long. Did you want to say something, Ryan? But informative.
The purpose of the trip, or the meeting, we have it every year. It's when they bring us together with other pastors in the community and they tell us what they're doing with the stuff that we're giving them. In the beginning, they all went around and said what they did, like Pastor Santiago doing his Care for Creation thing, Pastor Norma looking after us, make sure we don't get in trouble, all these different things. And then they spent the rest of the time saying how they've distributed the food that they've got, what they're doing to benefit the community, what they need help from us. And it's kind of a neat thing to see how we're working together as a church.
That's Trini. Most of you hopefully recognize her. And to the right is a man named Pastor Helmut, who is a volunteer from Germany. He's a pastor from Germany. He's worked there for a lot of times. He administers for a lot of years. He administers our program, our sponsorship program. And he's just this incredible man. He's just got such a zest for living. And he just recently had his 2nd foot amputated, just recently before we got there. So he showed up in a wheelchair, and I said, "How are you doing?" He goes, I'm fine, just a little shorter. The wonderful man. That's Pastora Avelina, who's the bishop's wife, Pastor Santiago, and Pastora Norma. Avelina is in charge of children's programming for the synod. Pastora Norma is in charge of partnerships. Pastor Gloria is she's just Pastora Gloria. She's got all kinds of ideas and things going and lots to say. Those ladies work at, that's Ingrid, who Ingrid sponsors. And that's our group at the beach. And the next pictures are, that's Trini. I hope you guys, some of you recognize her. And that's the bishop in Abilene. Does anyone want to talk about that occasion? It's a special occasion. Allie?
So when we had, like Ryan was talking about that meeting we had with all the pastors, one of the very first days, and at that meeting, the bishop invited us over for like a celebration on the last day of our trip, on the last night. So we all, 25 of us, plus like he had a bunch of other guests, and we went to his house, and we had this really delicious meal, all kinds of typical Salvadoran food, and it was really awesome. Really cool just to
And
be
something
part
he,
of his home.
something he shared at that dinner, which was, she said other people, but it wasn't like another delegation. It was people he was calling his family, and two of the young adults were children that during the war, their parents asked him to take them in and find a home for them. So he literally helped place them in another country to be adopted by another family to get them out of the country during the war. But it was interesting because he sees them and he kind of presented them as his children, and they had this loving relationship, even though they've been raised in another country by a different family. And but it kind of spoke to just how, and he talked a little bit about how, he didn't talk, I guess, about how active he was maybe during the war, but others sometimes would throw in things, well, this happened to the bishop during the war, or this is, what he was doing during the war. So it just gave us another little picture of maybe what things were like during the war and the active role he played, and it was very heartwarming to see these children come back and just be part of his family.
Speaking of the war, when was the war?
Gretchen probably is, she's like an expert about the war. When was the war? And
who has the question? Oh, okay. The war was actually building for probably hundreds of years because it was a legacy of colonialism where Europeans or the Spanish came and claimed the land and kept pushing the indigenous people off the land. So the basic struggle was economic equity and land rights. And there had been skirmishes throughout their history. There was a quite large revolt in 1932 that was squashed. The two remaining political parties are kind of grounded in that conflict. The two major ones, there are about 5 parties. The FMLN and the Arena party. Arena represented the ruling class, the people with money, and the military, and FMLN represented the people, they would say. So it's the party on the left and Arena is the party on the right. There's still some tension there, though they have fair and what we consider pretty open elections. But the war happened when those tensions started to build, and there were some Catholic priests that got very, very involved with people. Guerrilla armies formed. I think they would call themselves guerrillas, but oftentimes in our minds that means they were affiliated with the Soviet Union, and that's not necessarily a fair representation. Trini calls herself a guerrilla. She was a guerrilla because she fought on behalf of the people, not in combat, but she saved them. She took people to different refugee camps. So that was building, and a lot of Jesuit priests were getting involved, and then the Catholic Church needed to replace the Archbishop, and they appointed Archbishop Oscar Romero, thinking that he was an academic and kind of quiet and sickly, and they didn't think he would stir the waters. But one of his best friends was Rutilio Grande, a priest who was very, very involved in the movement to liberate people, and he was assassinated. And that just kind of energized Romero, and he became very, very outspoken on behalf of the people. And, I mean, if you go back and read his words, you just kind of get shivers at how much courage it took to say them, because he was clearly in danger in his own life, and they assassinated him. And that's pointed to as the beginning of the Civil War, that where it really came to a full war in 1980. And it lasted, depending on when you point the beginning and the end, 12 to 14 years. It took 75,000 civilian lives. And there are still people who are disappeared that have never been identified. And it ended pretty much with the massacre of the 6 Jesuit priests and their 2 housekeepers at Uca. And that's when the world finally couldn't ignore it any longer, and the peace accords were formed. So it's still very present in their experience now. Most people have some sort of a connection to it. So, long answer, sorry. The next, do you have any more questions?
No, that was-
I mean, anytime you want to talk about it, there are lots of people in this room who would be happy to talk to you about it more. Mark Peterson knows a lot about the history of El Salvador. I would defer to him on almost anything, so.
In our library, there's a book on Bishop Romero. I'm actually reading it right now. I'll probably be done in a week and a half, 2 weeks. Very interesting. Very interesting in his faith walk. And I would advise anybody to look at that book.
Okay, great, thanks.
I have a number of books on Romero too, and the Archbishop Romero movie you can find on, it's just called Romero, you can find it on Netflix. It's a really powerful movie. Okay, Casa Concordia, Angeline is going to talk to us about Casa Concordia.
So Casa Concordia is where we all stayed and where we were just welcomed with such open arms. And that is where Trinity welcomed us. And many of the sponsored children lived there as well. And as you can see, they took amazing care of us, wonderful food, and just the sense of community that was there was just very, very touching.
And Trinity's daughters run the kitchen,
Yes.
and they're awesome.
The food is amazing.
Yeah.
It's half the reason why I go.
Maybe more than half. It's, you know, a lot of people who have been to El Salvador multiple times, Tim Booth, who is a name we often bring up because he's such an expert, will all say it's the best food in El Salvador. We used to do more eating in restaurants, but we thought, why? Good. And we get fresh avocados at almost every meal. Because they just grow.
So this is where they let us in the kitchen and let us help make pupusas, which I don't know if anybody got a chance to try them upstairs today. There's some left over. But after we do that, I don't know, something was said to one of Trini, I mean, kind of teasing one of Trini's daughters, Alma, saying, well, now we're all going to come in and we're all going to cook. And she's like, no. What kind of once is enough? It's her kitchen, and totally understand, but it's kind of funny that she's protective of her kitchen too. And they do an amazing job.
They do an amazing job. They can turn a meal for 23 on a dime.
Right.
You know, what do you want in the morning? Chicken, fish, whatever. Even at noon, and they've got it ready for us. It's amazing. Trini stayed at my house for a few nights, and she stayed at Peterson's house too while she was here. And Rebecca and I can both attest that she is a master in the kitchen. I mean, I made her toast one morning, and every morning after that, I came downstairs. She was making my toast. She was cleaning up my kitchen. I was a little embarrassed because my daughter Kari said, "Our stove has never looked that good."
Okay, Casa Esperanza, I think Larry would like, could share a few words about this because it intersects with a lot of our ministries here.
Casa Esperanza is a home for homeless people, and it's our partnership in El Salvador, and we support them. And it's where people that are homeless can come and take a shower, get cleaned up, wash their clothes, mostly men, and then they can sit and play games with and just read newspapers, and we go there and we just get to know the men, get to know the people. They also have an area where they have some kids staying with their moms, and in years past I know that we interact with the kids, and it's just fun to watch them because they're so happy when we get to see them and play with them. But the men really like the company, and it's really something that is important to them. Language you would think might be a barrier, but surprisingly a lot of the men that are there do speak some English, and we have enough people in our group that speak Spanish, so there is not a problem. We just sit, play cards with them, and play games with them, and just make them feel like somebody cares about them.
Ellie, do you want to talk about the people we sat with?
Oh, yeah. So Gretchen and Matt Engel and I sat with, it was a husband-wife couple, and this woman, I don't remember her name, Jack.
Yeah, I think it was Jack.
Oh my gosh, she was like so, she kissed me probably a dozen times, and we were there for like 20 minutes. And she was just, she could not believe, I don't think she could just believe like that we were there spending time with her playing games, and she just was hugging and laughing and just so excited that we were there. It was like unreal. Really.
That's Vernon, who now has a job and he's dressed in his working clothes.
And they are making that place something that, because they do have doctors and nurses come in once in a while and so the people that are staying there for the 4 or 5 hours in the morning do get some medical assistance if they need it, and some nurses that come in and watch over them, and they get a meal towards the end, and then unfortunately they have to leave to go back out on the streets, but at least when they're there, they're safe. The place is not in a safe neighborhood, but we have always felt safe there, but it's unfortunate that the people have to go back out into the dangers of that area.
It's also grown into much more than just a meal ministry, because in the back there, they have much their own pharmacy. They've got schools going on for kids in the area. They've got a clinic. They have nurses and nurses in training.
All right, let's make this real though. So they have a pharmacy, which is a shelf that's pretty sparsely
They have a pharmacy.
supplied.
They have
And-
supply.
And they have a pharmacy, but they run out a lot. They have doctors there twice a week. So that's a huge improvement from what it was, but like sometimes I think we get in our mind that it's like repairs of the breach, which has this really well staffed clinic. It's not like that at all. But they do have a school, a
And
little preschool.
it's been growing a lot, and it's become much more than just a food ministry.
Right. They have an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting once a week, I think, Tuesdays, I think, and they bake bread for that. And that's right outside. You can see someone sleeping on the street. It's really, I remember the first time I went, it just had this impact on me, like I had never seen poverty like that, ever.
You know, I can attest to that. I was very moved by the necessity for this beacon of hope. There are people in their 20s that were, literally did not know where their next meal was coming from. And this is a completely necessary, integral part of that neighborhood that needs to be supported. The pennies that we do go directly to people that are really, really in need.
Next set of slides shows our Capacitación, I said that terribly, Capacitación training event for teachers. We've done this for about 7 years, capacitation event. We've done this about 7 years. I have identified as a need. Training for their teachers, most of whom are high school kids. And they ask for things like age-level characteristics and classroom management. So we always run through a lesson with them, and we'll let Brenda talk a little bit more about that.
I'd actually like to just back up real quick to Casa Esperanza and talk a little bit about, we were talking about how they've added the schooling and they've added the pharmacy and they've added a couple of extra things. And I think it was only even 2 years ago when I went last that they were only doing meals 2 or 3 times a week, and now it's up to 4. Every time they get a chance, they get to add on. Trini, who owns just a little tiny piece of land in the middle of nowhere, uses as much as she can grow on that property despite the current situation. But she uses the food as much as she can grow there to help out there as well. And she likes to mark what we might not even notice, but to her they're little steps, they're little things. It's just now we can add this to the list of things that we can help out with, and it kind of refocuses you, because we might look at that and be like, they've got 3 bottles of aspirin, that's their pharmacy, but they didn't have those before. Now she can help out somehow. But as for
Can I just add one thing to that too? One thing Trini says a lot is primero Dios, or gracias a Dios. which means God first, or thanks to God. And that's, I would say that's how she sustains her pharmacy. She looks at the 3 bottles of ibuprofen she has, and she says, well, gracias a Dios, we'll have more. And usually she does. It's not enough to last for a year, but it usually
The little steps.
Little steps, lots of faith.
So the training event that we do, as I just said, I went a couple years ago. One of the things that struck me the most exciting was I saw people there this year that I saw 2 years ago. And that goes to show what faith these, and as she said, they're high school kids. There was a girl that I met 2 years ago, she's now 14, so she was only 12 2 years ago, and yet she's still trying to help out in her community. She understands the importance of going and getting the skills that she can so she can take them back to her church and have a positive impact on the even younger kids than herself. But for the most part, these people that are trying to do this, these high school kids, are the Sunday school teachers. They are the leaders of the much younger youth. We use a kind of a rotation program that's similar to what we do here. And so you can see that there was a couple of things. There was a games program that we did where they got to get out some energy and got to run around and got to have fun and got to laugh. And that was probably the best one to watch because you could just see them let loose. There was a singing portion where they got to learn some songs, and they actually took words and tried to put them to a song that they already knew, so it got them to use their creativity a little bit. There was another one where they acted out a scene, and very important for the kids in their area. They've all heard the story of the communion or whatever. But to get them to act it out puts it a little bit more into their mindset than just hearing it. Now they're acting it out, so they're going to remember it a little bit better. And then we also did an art project where they could take these things that they're learning, and it teaches them a project. But during that project, where they're teaching it to the younger kids, the kids are learning a Bible story. So very similar to the kind of the same things we do here in our Sunday school class. We just taught on a rotation. Everybody got to learn something new, and hopefully they take that back to offering up, to their classes. Maybe games is the best way for their group to learn, or maybe they find that the drama was the best way to learn. And we all had our tasks in it, and it was great to see everybody working together with, what was there, 45 people plus or minus of, other Sunday school teachers from there.
Next, I think we're moving to Fundación Éxodo, which is a children's home.
It's not an official partner of ours. It's a ministry that we're affiliated with because of a generous donation to St. Matthew's that was designated for a children's home. So we visit it every year just to see what we're doing, what's going on there. And I think Brian and maybe Kevin, Brian. I looked at Mr. Jew. But Brian and Kevin are going to share some.
So every year when we go here, well, I've only been there for 2, but I can say it's probably one of the most difficult things to do, not because it's any hard work, but just for the single fact that we have to leave. But before we get to that, we go here and we check out all this place that they have. This is an area where they bring in kids of all ages, from infants, not infants, but small children to teenagers, and they give them houses, they give them homes, so that they can kind of learn to be functioning members of society. And when we go here, we first spend the time touring just to make sure that they're growing, they're doing good things. And then we spend the rest of the time playing with the kids. And it really is a very hard thing to leave, because we go here and there's instant connection. There's people jumping on and climbing on each other. We play intense games of soccer, even though they're kicking our butts. We play football, we joke, we laugh, and we have this great time. And at the end of the day, we have to leave, and it's just it can be tough. But at the same time, to know that these kids are now in a safe place, even though, because some of them have come from very rough and very, very troubled pasts, that they're now in a safe place where they can grow and be integrated and be loved. It's worth going despite the pain.
If I could say something about this, it really touched me. The woman operating this children's home, really, we were, when you go on trips like this, it's hard to relate the personal experience. When you travel, you're taken out of your comfort zone and you're put into in this place, as in many other foreign countries, the language is different. But you see examples of faith. And in this particular experience, the administrator of this children's home, to me, exhibited total commitment and communication and related God in her life in the first, second, and third person. She was operating on God time. And this is a woman that has 3 daughters, has a degree in dentistry, but felt the calling to head this children's home. And she's raising these 3 daughters. She's also raising 46 other children. And in conversation with her, I was just so impressed with her faith and her walk. She sat, and I had talked about Fernando, a little 8-year-old who was just a fireball in playing soccer, and he wanted to be one of the team captains. This is a kid that's got potential, and she called him over, and right away, this is a kid who sat on her knee, and so she was really involved in these children's lives personally, and each one of them was given a space for themselves and showed us their space, and they were proud of their space, and they were really given a lot of direction. In this particular, having a greenhouse, they're raising chickens on this, just a lot of initiatives that were really, really positive, and her faith alone. I mean, in this particular print here I purchased is for me an example of her in this environment and her faith. It was very, very moving to me.
Anyone else have anything else to add about the children's home? I want to make sure we're leaving time for questions at the end too. One of the real high points of our trip, high and maybe low point, was visiting the community of Pastor Santiago, who is in charge of emergency services and care for creation. That's him. Smiles through the pain. That's what I would say about him. He's had this just incredible past, and he keeps smiling. And we got to visit his congregation, and Stephanie is going to cover a few highlights of that visit.
Okay, so we went to Pastor Santiago's church. So we went to Pastor Santiago's church, and his church is in a small community that's divided by 2 gangs. And his church is in one of the gang areas, and it's really difficult for people who live in the other gang area to be able to attend church. They're basically risking their lives if they come to church. So, and we weren't able to we went to his church, but we weren't able to see the community because it just would have been too dangerous for us. But it was a wonderful, wonderful worship service, and the people there were so loving. And the lady I was sitting next to, they had booklets that were all in Spanish, but she always made sure that she pointed out where we were in the service so that I could, sing along or say the words along with them or attempt to. And yeah, so it was just beautiful worship service. And afterwards we went out to a space that they had, and they wanted to make it into a Sunday school room. And it was outside, and it had lots of grass and weeds. And the pastor brought out 2 machetes and told us that we were going to help them clear this area for a new Sunday school room. And so we all took turns helping clear the area as a sign of our partnership and as a sign of us walking together with them.
I think at one point he kind of thought, what have I done? And then the machete stopped and sprinkles. I think he thought a couple of people would do it, but we all wanted turns, and he got a little worried.
I think one other thing about this whole process right here was that, like she said, there's a dividing line between two gangs, and Pastor Santiago, like Gretchen said, smiling through the pain, he doesn't just stop. It's not, there are two gangs, darn, we gotta go somewhere else. He's planning to keep going here, to start a Sunday school room, to be in this area and be with the people. So I think that's really powerful too, that he's chosen to stay in that area.
And he wants to reach out to the
Yeah.
gangs. He wants them to know God's love.
Yeah, they keep talking about reaching out in love, not in punishment.
Okay,
Embassy.
The embassy? Oh, did we skip the food break?
It's kind of covered.
No, the shipments.
All that.
Right. Okay, maybe we don't have a folder for that. But I think Ally wanted to talk about food.
Well, okay, when food was on the list, I thought she meant like food we ate, but it's the food we distributed. But so I don't know too much about the background of the Food for Kids, but it was really neat. We went to one of the refugee camps, Bay Esperanza, and it was cool to see. They had just received their shipment, so in their warehouse in the corner, there was all kinds of food, and then they were in the process of giving it to the people there. And we also helped with the pastoral food. I don't know the background on it, but we just helped carry all kinds of bags of beans and rice, and it was really heavy. But we carried it from one part to where they picked it up, and it was just, it's rewarding because they don't really get much. The pastors they don't get paid a lot, so it was great to help them out.
Last year, they didn't get paid at all, some of them. And so we raised, St. Matthew might have remembered, we raised $4,000 to help support that. It's 3 times that they're being delivered and needed. So,
And there's
and
that-
the food is, oh, go ahead.
Well, just that when we got there, they said when the food shipment did arrive, literally a couple communities came immediately to pick up the food. So it's very important to them, and as soon as word got out that it was coming in, they were like there waiting to take a shipment back to their communities.
And then the final set of slides is about our embassy visit, which is all outside the embassy because even Pastor Frick wasn't able to get a camera inside. We got off the bus with it, and they're like, nope. So I think Caitlin's gonna talk about that a little bit because it had a pretty profound effect on all of us. But Caitlin's gonna.
Okay, so we went on this trip to the embassy after a call that Pastor Santiago put out about, like, please pray for our communities. There's been a lot of violence, and some people on the El Salvador committee in Milwaukee, including Gretchen, felt like we should do more than just pray. And so we set up an appointment with the public affairs officer at the U.S. Embassy, and after providing passport information, there was really tight security to get in. She had prepared a PowerPoint presentation for us, except instead of making us sit there through a presentation, she asked us if we had any statements or questions, and we had prepared a couple of statements, and so a couple of people from our group delivered those. And I feel like it was genuinely well received, and the woman who we were talking with really seemed to care about what we had to say. And we also brought the Bishop Gomez and Pastor Santiago with us, and they also gave some speeches about the violence in their communities and about how the church is on the forefront of those. And the U.S. has recently allocated $230 million to Central America. And so El Salvador isn't going to get all of that, but there is some money available, and we were telling them where we felt it would be useful for that to go into economic development and the reintegration of people who have been deported from America.
Anyone else have anything to add to that?
I feel like a lot of people on this trip would say that this is one of the most rewarding things that we did, because even last year, you feel like you go there for 10 days and then you leave, and you start to wonder what kind of impact you left. There's a guy down there, Jamie Stark, and during a late night conversation with him, he said, you can't save El Salvador in 10 days. It's true, but this was one of the chances we got to actually feel like we did something. We were able to bring the bishop and Pastor Santiago so that they could share what they were seeing in their own words, the troubles they see on the front line, and a chance for them to work together with the embassy. Because as Pastor Santi, as the bishop said, they're on the front line, they're the tip of the spear, and the embassy and the government is like the push behind it. If they work together, they can do so much more than they could individually. So I think for a lot of us, it was just a very rewarding time to see change actually happening in front of us.
And it feels like we built bridges too, because Bishop Gomez offered an invitation to the public affairs officer to go out and see some of the projects that the Lutheran Church had in place. And the public affairs officer said that she would love to go out and see those things. And she said she would follow through, and I'm really hoping that she does.
One of their big concerns in the church was that the church is so involved in this whole issue of violence, and there are national conversations about ending the violence, but the Lutheran Church has not been invited to be a part of those, and that's what they're really asking for, is just to be a part of those discussions. And so that was the point, the big point of it, and I do feel pretty hopeful that avenues of communication were open, so it was pretty. I think, you know, I don't know how many people were kind of wondering, what are we doing? Is it going to work? But I think the whole group left feeling it was pretty meaningful. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. And we have a little bit of time, so if you have any questions about anything we did or for anybody's experience, please ask.
At one point, somebody said, I don't remember what facility it was at, but that some of the kids we sponsor, people sponsor here, were living there.
Yeah.
So they're living in that area, not with their parents, not with...
Well, some of the kids who we sponsor are families of Trini. They're her grandkids, and so her 2 daughters run the kitchen, and so the kids are kind of all around. And it also, so where we say it's a diaconal house, they call it, more or less. So, I mean, Trini and some of her family members live there. It's also where the bishop has his offices in this complex type of thing. It's a place for delegations to stay. And she also takes in some orphans at times too, and they live in the house, they help out and around. So the kids we sponsor, some of them do live there, and part of their sponsorship, they're supposed to help around Casa Concordia. So yeah, some of them do live there. Some are family members, some have been orphaned, and Trini has taken them in.
I think maybe you were referring also to Casa Esperanza, and there are 5 children affiliated with Casa Esperanza who we sponsored. 2 of them live there. Their mother is pretty severely handicapped, so she's got 2 children. They actually live at Casa Esperanza, but no more children live there because it's not really a great place for children to live. Other questions?
Are you allowed to bring in medicines, Tylenol and so forth?
That's a very good question. We used to, but it's gotten really bad with customs. They make you itemize everything, and then you have to pay. So it's better if we can bring the money, even though we might be able to get ibuprofen cheaper here. It's just better if we bring the money and let them shop for it there. So even the Mission of Healing that goes in February doesn't bring much medication with them anymore. Any other questions?
It might be mentioned that the young people here are all offshoots of our Sunday school program. And now, I don't want it to be, and they're all really intelligent young college students. And the parents here, you know, as your children get older, to give them an experience like this is just totally invaluable. It gives them a perspective of the world and moves them into adulthood that is totally invaluable in their upbringing in faith and education. So it might be mentioned there.
I think everybody who does this trip has changed a little bit. And, you know, the students who come with us are at that point in their life where those changes can have a bigger impact on them maybe. And I always like to say to parents, I wish you could see your kids. Because they're awesome. They're just awesome. They work so hard and they do a great job. It's an honor to be with them. Any other questions? Anyone else have anything you want to sum up the trip with, or?
So it was really hard coming back.
Yeah. I think what I took away this year too, I've come as a student so many years, and this year I'm not a student anymore. And so I think that kind of bridging that gap from student to adult is very different. But the way that the Salvadorans live, like we were talking about, it's little step by little step. And I think the same thing can be said in all of our lives. We don't know what God has in plan for us, but He has all these little steps that we're taking to get us there. So I think we need to have patience in America, maybe a little more patience for things, and live like them a little more and take it step by step.
So if anyone's interested in going on the trip, we go in January at about the same time every year. It's a wonderful time to go. It's about 90 in El Salvador. I know we have some people at this table thinking about going in a year or two. So if you have any questions, talk to any of us, talk to me or Pastor Chris, and we'd love to have you join us.
Thanks for doing it, Gretchen.
It's easy thing to do when you have people like this. All right. So I hope you enjoyed this better than the end.
Okay.